Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we're in Ezra chapter 2. We're continuing our study on the list of names that returned from Babylon back to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we look at verses 61 to 63, we're going to see that there were three families of the priests that could not prove their relationship to the children of Israel. They did not keep proper records. They were the children of Habiah, the children of Kaz, and the children of Barzillai. Now, let's read verse 61 and 62. And it says here, and of the children of the priests, the children of Habiah, the children of Kaz, and the children of Barzillai, which took a wife of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and was called after their name, these sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but they were not found. Therefore were they as polluted, put from the priesthood. So these three families tried to be part of the Jewish community, part of the priesthood of Israel, but they had to be rejected because they could not prove their genealogy. Now, one of the priests married a daughter of Barzillai, and this priest, when he married the daughter of Barzillai, he decided to take the name Barzillai for his name, rather than giving his name to his wife's name. So he married the daughter of Barzillai and wanted to be basically a Barzillaiite, if you want to call it. But now Barzillai was well known in David's history, and we see that in 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 27, 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 32 to 39, and 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 7. Now, Barzillai was a very rich man, and he was a man of great honor. And this priest may have married his daughter for the reputation that Barzillai had, and also maybe to be a part of the inheritance of Barzillai. But the priest's descendants, so this priest marries Barzillai's daughter, and then he has children, and they have children also. So this priest's descendants did not keep strict records of their genealogy, and they could not prove their claim of belonging to the priesthood. Now, because the priest changed his name to Barzillai, suspicion came on all of the descendants. Therefore, in verse 63, they could not perform the duties of the priest. It says in verse 63, and the Tirshatha, remember, the Tirshatha means governor. It means the Tirshatha is the governor. It's not the name of a family. The Tirshatha said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy things until there stood up a priest with Urim and with Thummim. Now, what happened with this priest in taking on the name of Barzillai, and his descendants having the name Barzillai also, should be a warning to every Christian. You are a royal priesthood unto God. Do not sell out. Do not sell it out by marrying the world for what you can inherit from it. Any inheritance from this world is only temporal. Do not change your name and identify to the world. Although you will not lose your salvation, yet you will lose your testimony to the world and the respect of being known as a child and as a servant of God. There will be no rewards given to you because you gave up your eternal rewards for earthly temporal rewards. Yes, you're saved. Yes, you'll go to heaven. But you chose to have your reward here on earth, and that's what you'll get. This is what happened to this man. He was a priest of God, born of the family of Levi. He was a priest unto God. And he married a daughter of Barzillai and decided to give up his name as a priest and to be named as unto Barzillai. And now, years later, the generations of his family down the line, they're trying to prove that, well, hey, my great-great-grandfather, he was a priest, and he got married to a daughter of Barzillai. Well, show me the paper. Can't do it. Well, sorry then. It's you can't do it. But this priest chose to identify, in a sense, with the world, and so also we as children of God, we need to see that we have a high and a holy calling. Don't give up the treasures of heaven for earthly, temporal, an inheritance here on this earth, because it's only gonna pass away. Now, verses 64 to 67, in these verses, you can read them. It gives the sum total of all that went back to Jerusalem in the first return here with Zerubbabel. So verses 64 to 67 gives the total amount of everything that went back with Zerubbabel and the people to Jerusalem. Now, verses 68 and 69, let's read those. And it says, "And some of the chief of the fathers, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is at Jerusalem, they offered freely for the house of God to set it up in his place. They gave after their ability unto the treasure of the work 61,000 drams of gold, and 5,000 pounds of silver, and 100 priests' garments." Now, in verse 68, when it says they came to the house of the Lord, it means that they came to the place where the temple used to be, where Solomon's temple used to be, which was now in ruins, and where they would rebuild it. So when it says they came to the house of the Lord, it doesn't mean they came to an actual building. It means they arrived at the place where Solomon's temple used to be. The temple area would probably be very easy to recognize because of the size of the stones that Solomon used to build the temple. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 5 and verse 17. They were big stones, and they were not only big, but they were costly stones. That means they were kind of like special stones that were used. So as the children of Israel come back to Jerusalem and they're looking over all the ruins and they're looking for the temple, when they see these specific stones, these big, huge, special stones, then they know that's the place where the temple used to be. There is a great lesson that we can learn from these verses of scripture here. That 70 years earlier in 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verses 18 and 19, the worship at the temple marked the last days of the Jews in Jerusalem. And it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, right? So the very last, just before Nebuchadnezzar takes away the children of Israel as captives to Babylon, they're worshiping at the temple in Jerusalem. And now they return and they find themselves right back at the temple area. The worship of God should always be our starting point for any endeavor in God's service. Don't build the walls first. Build the temple first. First, build the temple, the place of worship. That should be the starting point. Whenever we serve God, whatever we do, our starting point should be prayer. We should pray and the Word of God. And that should be our starting point in any endeavor that we do with God in this life, whatever He calls us to. When they came to the temple, then they willingly gave an offering to rebuild the temple. Their hearts, the hearts of these returning Jewish people, were not moved at the gates of Jerusalem, and their hearts were not moved at the wall, the broken down wall of Jerusalem, or of any other area in Jerusalem. But their hearts were moved to give of themselves when they came and they saw the temple in ruins. Right? Their hearts were moved when they saw the house of God in ruins. Our hearts are moved in God's work. We may hear of a work of God in some area of the world, but when we actually go there, then our hearts are moved to give of ourselves. As I said earlier in our studies, Ezra, the book of Ezra, is a picture of a returning, backslidden Christian who once worshiped and served God, but then they gave themselves to this world. The starting point for any backslider is their worship of God. That's the starting point. When a person gets saved and they serve God and they pray and they go to Bible studies, and then something happens 5 years later and they're gone. And they go back into the world, pressures, trials, maybe a death in the family, something happens, and they go back into the world. And you don't see them at church anymore. You don't see them at Bible study anymore. They're not around anymore. They don't want anything to do anymore with God. And now, 5 years later, or 10 years after that, God touches their heart. And He does a work in their heart. And they return. The first thing that needs to be established in that backslidden Christian's heart is what? Is the temple in their heart. That's the first thing. The first thing is to rebuild their center of worship with God. Their relationship to God must be established first. This must be the first thing that's established to rebuild a Christian life. Listen, to rebuild a Christian life without establishing worship to God first results in a dead religion. They only have a form of godliness. It's no sense in bringing a backslidden Christian back to church if they're not going to, from their heart, worship God. You can bring them back to church, but it's only dead religion in their heart. It means nothing to them. All right, we're going to finish this lesson in verse 70, and it says, "So the priests and the Levites and some of the people and the singers and the porters and the Nethinims dwelt in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. Now, it seems that a majority of the people who returned were from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Now, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin were the southern kingdom of Judah. Remember, Israel was divided into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And it seems like most of the people that returned here with Zerubbabel were from the southern kingdom of Judah. When they first returned, they would settle in or close to the city of Jerusalem. But as time went on, they would gradually settle in the cities that their families were from. For example, if your family, before the captivity, if your family was from Bethlehem, you would probably go back to Bethlehem. Or if your family was from Ramah, you would probably want to go back to Ramah. Or Anathoth, or Bethel, or Jericho, or Nebo. So this is what it's saying here in verse 70. Remember, this book of Ezra was written at least 60 years after the first return. By this time, they would have spread out from Jerusalem, from the city of Jerusalem. So Ezra's writing this book, and it's now been 60 years at least since they've returned, and since the temple has been rebuilt. And the first group of people that came back, they're not just in the city of Jerusalem now. They've spread out into the parts of Israel where their families were originally from before the captivity. All right, we're going to start chapter 3 next lesson, but until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.